Hi guys, this is Pastor Nick at Impact Church of God. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Here we are, guys. It's Friday. It's the Passion, and today we're going to be talking about Jesus and his being crucified. So yesterday we talked of how the chief priests were holding on to Jesus through the night. They are getting ready to bring him to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate to be sentenced to death. They had to bring him to a higher authority to do that. So here we are. We're going to start our reading today in the book of John, chapter 18, verses 28 through 31. It says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the hall of judgment. And it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. And Pilate then went out unto them and said, What accusation bring you against this man? And they answered and said unto him, If it were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee. And then said Pilate unto them, Take you him and judge him for yourselves. It's your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." So that tells us right there they had to go to Pontius Pilate to do this. And here we are, and Jesus is brought before him, and the conversation that Pilate begins to have with Jesus is he asks him, "Are you a king?" And Jesus' reply to him was that my kingdom is not of this world. He tells Pilate that he came to be a witness of the truth. And of course, Pilate was disturbed, but curious at the same time, in what it meant that he was saying about the truth and what truth was. And so Jesus told us in a few chapters before this in John that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And I can't imagine the thoughts that was running through Pilate's mind, and as he began to look at Jesus and talk with him more. And I believe his wheels started turning, and definitely there was some things that was happening on the inside, maybe a tug at his heart. And here it is that the Son of God is standing right in front of him that day. I can't imagine how Pontius Pilate must have felt and the things that were going through his heart and mind. But Pilate begins to fall under a lot of pressure from the crowd that day, from the Jewish leaders. He began to, I believe his stress level began to go up. I believe that because of all the shoutings that began to ring out on every side of that place, Pilate made a decision that he seemed like he really didn't want to make. But he felt like because of the crowd constantly coming at him, he began to say, well, I'm going to have him whipped. I'm going to just take him, let him be led away to be whipped and scourged and beaten. And we see that this happens, and then when he's brought back out of that place of beating, it was more like a slaughter, because the Roman guards, they were unmerciful towards anybody. They were bent on what they could do to cause the most pain to their victims. So when he was brought back out in front of the people, he was pretty much beaten to a place where he was almost unrecognizable at the time. And ultimately it turned out that Pilate thought that he would satisfy the people by doing this, but they were not. They were not satisfied, because it goes on to tell us that the people began to cry out, "Crucify him." And then in John, the 19th chapter, verses 1 through 6, we'll read there and pick up in 16, 17, and 18 of that same chapter. It says, "Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. And it said, Hail, the King of the Jews. They smote him with their hands. And Pilate therefore went forth again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. And then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said unto him, Take you him and crucify him, for I have found no fault in him. In verse 16, 17, and 18, it says, Then they delivered him therefore unto, and then he, Pontius Pilate, delivered him into them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. And it says, He bearing his cross went forth into a place called the place of the skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, and where they crucified him and two others with him on either side, and Jesus in the middle. When we look at this, we see that here he is. Jesus is being delivered to them to be crucified. The crown of thorns that are resting on his head are penetrating into his skin, into his scalp, and they put a purple robe on him. Now, I couldn't imagine the robe, how uncomfortable it must have been with all the beating that he just now faced, the gaping sores and the wounds that were open in his own body that was broken already, and all this before the cross. As we begin to look at his battered body beaten for you and I, and then he begins to be put on this cross and nailed in his hands and his feet. The Bible tells us that they took one nail and they put it in his hand, or took nails and put it in his hands and also his feet. And this was another type of Roman torture, as much as they could possibly do to a person to cause pain and not sudden death. That was what they did. But it goes on and it tells us that there that day, as Jesus hung for 6 hours, Jesus hung on that cross and suffered for you and for me. In fact, he suffered for whosoever will call upon his name to be saved. For 6 hours he hung there. And it says at the 9th hour, which was at 3 p.m. that day, they began to take his body down as he took the last breath and said, It is finished. After that, it says, before they took his body down, the veil was torn in the temple. It was ripped from top to bottom. It said that there was darkness that covered the whole land, and the sun stopped shining. And so as they took his body down, here it is that they took him that evening, and they took him to a borrowed tomb, it says. And that evening, the chief priest decided that they would go back to Pontius Pilate to assure that Jesus or no one else could tamper with his body. So they asked Pontius Pilate to put soldiers there to guard in front of the tomb. Now, I begin to think about this. What were they afraid of? No matter how bad they wanted to get rid of Jesus, maybe, just maybe, they started thinking, what did they really do? They knew and they remembered the words that Jesus had told them, that after 3 days that he would rise again. We love you guys. God bless you. Friday's here, but Sunday's coming.